Okay. Good morning to everybody. I very warm welcome to all our participants to the seminar by IN4climate North Rhine-Westphalia, creating innovation for a decarbonized industry. Yes, I think all at the eceee are aware of the challenge of decarbonizing industries. Particularly heavy industries are very relevant for climate change. Only 5 industries are dominating over 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And these are the materials producing industries. And we know that even in a sustainable future, we will need more materials for wealth all over the world. So that shows that we need several strategies. We need material efficiency. We need to decarbonize materials processing, which is particularly challenging and needs a very high amount of renewable energy, including respective infrastructures. So that's really the challenge we want to tackle, the initiatives and the people today here at the seminar want to tackle. And also this challenge shows that companies and markets will not be able to solve the issue alone. So what we need is a very comprehensive and targeted package for them, which consists of technology development, infrastructure development for these high volumes of renewable energy, large-scale electricity transmission, hydrogen and carbon transport. But of course, also we need policy frameworks to make that all happen, and very strong policy support for parts of the program we have outstanding. And of course, we need understanding and support by society, which means that industry has to generate societal value. So in order really to repeat the point, industry has basically to develop a new mode of operation from a traditional market-based competition towards a competition to generate societal value, to work together with society on a decarbonized future. And as particularly the infrastructure challenge shows, this will need new forms of public-private partnerships, of companies working together with policy and society to generate a sustainable future for us all. And to enable companies to join forces, the state of North Rhine-Westphalia has founded the initiative IN4climate North Rhine-Westphalia in 2018, which has to date over 40 members, many of them renowned industrial leaders. And its aim is to jointly promote and enable climate neutral basic industry in North Rhine-Westphalia and for the world. So I'm very happy that the initiative has organized this event to raise the profile of the topic and to have a discussion on how we can enable industry to live up on these challenges on its new role. And I'm also very happy to have very interesting and competent guests here on the panel today. We will have 2 distinguished speakers from industry who are very much drivers of this transition for industry. We will have 3 speakers from leading energy agency in the fields from France, Sweden and North Rhine-Westphalia, who are also trying to promote industrial transition in their constituencies. And I think together we will be able to discuss what it really needs to jointly make industrial transition a success. And of course, we are happy to invite others to join. We are happy to invite the eceee community to go this way with us. So again, a warm welcome from my side to all our speakers and a warm welcome to our audience. I'm very much looking forward to your participation. Particularly our audience, which is always very lively at the eceee. So I'm very happy to have your questions, to have your remarks on our discussion. Please post your questions and remarks in Woover and we will pick them up, and the panelists are happy to discuss, and we have reserved enough time. So after this introduction, maybe briefly to my own person, I'm Stefan Lechtenböhmer from Wuppertal Institute. I'm head of IN4climate, which is the scientific part of IN4climate initiative. And I'm also chair of panel 6, which starts almost immediately after this session. So I take the opportunity to already now invite you to that. So welcome from my side. And now I hand over to Michael Walter from North Rhine-Westphalia, from the initiative IN4climate, who will give us a brief introduction into the initiative.
Thank you, Stefan. I hope everybody can hear me now and everything works. Good morning and welcome from me. I'm happy to give a very short introduction to IN4climate North Rhine-Westphalia as the host of this side event. IN4climate North Rhine-Westphalia is an initiative. We're working towards a climate neutral, mainly energy intensive primary industry. That's our industry focus. We're funded and founded by the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, at the request of industry, actually. And we're bringing together industry, research, and politics to work together on this huge transition task we're all facing. This is actually what we aim to do here at eceee, what we're trying to provide for this conference, providing additional input from industry, from agency, to a more research-centered conference. This is the dual task we're all facing, or that everybody faces that has committed itself to the Paris Agreement goals. We're all, as regions or as nations, we're all trying to maintain our industrial base while doing so. We're all trying to maintain wealth generation, jobs creation that comes with industry. We're all trying to avoid carbon leakage, and really get our regional, our national industries through this transition towards 2050, towards climate neutrality, which for North Rhine-Westphalia is a way above average task, because we have 50% of Germany's, 10% of Europe's energy intensive industry here in North Rhine-Westphalia. So a lot to do, but on the other hand, you can say that if we can show how to do this, we can really be a blueprint for other regions or for other nations. We're trying nothing less than combining competitiveness with climate protection, or maybe even competitiveness through climate protection. And we're trying to do this by working together with industry, research, and politics. Now, what we're trying to do, yes, IN4climate is a network. IN4climate is also an information, knowledge sharing platform. IN4climate is a think tank. But what's most important for me is that IN4climate is a working platform. We're really trying to work together with industry, with research, on solutions for this transition we're all facing. Working on identifying the necessary technologies, identifying the needs to further develop, to upscale, to prototype, to actually put in motion these technologies. Always looking at the wider system. We're actually also trying to initiate actual application projects ourselves on a smaller scale on the state level, but we're also trying to initiate larger application projects where we will need funding from the federal and the European level, considering the large companies we're working with in IN4climate. We're also doing a lot of networking, of course, not only in IN4climate with our internal stakeholders, with our partners, but also with a wide network nationally as well as internationally. And we're working on communications. We're working on, we're trying to develop that industry storyline, that industry narrative. you could say, once again, presenting industry as a solutions provider, and to early on generate public acceptance for the necessary technologies, and especially the infrastructure that comes with it. So, like I said, we have this focus on the primary industry, the most energy intensive industries, but we also realized very early on that we need to include the energy providers and grid operators for this comprehensive picture we're trying to paint. We're also engaging the industry associations via an advisory board. But we're open to SMEs as well. You know, no closed shop for the big guns in North Rhine-Westphalia. Also closely monitoring the startup scene, and very important, we're in constant talks with the organized civil society. We're talking with the trade unions, environmental organizations, the church. We're in constant talks with other governments. Or similar organizations to us, nationally as well as internationally. Stefan already mentioned the Cypher Climate. We're in a lucky position to have our own large research project within IN4climate, where some high-profile research organizations are working on all the topics we're dealing with in this industry transition. Working on single technologies and infrastructure up to more comprehensive intersectoral value chains, up to whole transition scenarios and specific transition pathways as well, and looking at the regulatory framework that we're all working in. Stefan mentioned it already. He leads the Cypher Climate, and we have this huge research project that constantly provides input for working groups. Now, most of our main goals can easily be deduced by what I already said. So I'd just like to make a few points. First, IN4climate deals or aims to generate knowledge as well as action. That's very important for us. Like I said, we're working on these scenarios. We're generating knowledge, but we also put this knowledge into action. The second point is that we're working on the where as well as the when it comes to industry transition. Working on this 2050 climate neutrality vision, but we're looking at the specific path we, as a region, with our industry, can actually walk towards this goal. And third point I'd like to make is that we really aim to be this blueprint for other regions in Europe, but also worldwide. Just to give you some insight in the topics we're working on right now. These are current working groups within IN4climate. CO2 should read CO2 economy. This is fluctuating. These are not set in stone. We're goal-oriented in a working groups, and once a working group declares itself done, it can make room for another topic to be tackled within IN4climate. These are partners. This is always a slide I can do in 5 hours once I start talking about all our partners. In this case, I do it in 5 seconds and say these are partners. And this is me. So thanks for your attention. If there are questions that we can't answer, we can't tackle within this side event, get in touch with me. Or if you just wanna take up discourse with us, if you just want to talk with us, get in touch. Thank you all, and back to Stefan.
I'm sorry, Stefan, at the moment we can't hear you. So I'm going to suggest that we move on to the next presentation, if that is okay. Okay, so the next presentation is Christoph Reisfelder from Heidelberg Cement. Michael, do you want to say a few words about Heidelberg?
Other than that, Heidelberg Cement is a valued partner in IN4climate and very active in our working groups. Heidelberg Cement actually is one of the companies not traditionally with the main base in North Rhine-Westphalia, but a highly relevant company for everything we're trying to do. And we're very happy to have them. Very happy to have had them very early on when we started IN4climate. But on everything that Heidelberg Cement does and on all the topics they're dealing with, I think Christoph is way better qualified to talk about that than me.
Thank you. So I will just take over. Thank you very much, Michael. Christoph Reisfelder is my name, and I have the honor to present you a little bit further on Heidelberg Cement and the decarbonization of cement and concrete, and why we need for that cross-sectoral cooperation, and why it's very good that initiatives like IN4climate exist to bring us all together. So I will start my presentation by quickly saying something about who we are. Michael made already a quite perfect introduction on that, so I will keep that short. I will then enlighten you a little bit on current climate protection measures in cement production, but then coming to the challenge process emissions and the need for CCUS to go the last mile. And then why CCUS demands in the end cross-sectoral cooperation. So who are we as Heidelberg Cement? We are almost 147 years old, and we are one of the leading construction materials manufacturers of the world. We are currently #2 worldwide in cement and #1 in ready-mix concrete and aggregates, which means sand and gravel. So we operate with 55,000 employees all around the world, apart from Latin America. And we operate 3,100 production sites in more than 50 countries with a cement capacity around 200 million tons per year and aggregates resources around 20 billion tons per year. And what is quite crucial is that we are a fully vertically integrated construction materials producer. This means we start with the raw materials extraction, especially the limestone for cement production. We produce cement, we produce sand and gravel to make concrete in the end, and also asphalt, which are the end products which most of you are likely more suitable with, and which you see with the big trucks with the drums running around the cities and in the rural areas. In the end, we have 3 types of customers. The first one is public sector projects, large-scale infrastructure projects primarily, which make up something between a third and 50% of our customer base. Then, of course, commercial projects like offices, but also foundations for industrial projects. And, of course, finally, the private consumers that are in as well. Who build their own homes and which have to live somewhere. So we satisfy these needs as a fully vertically integrated company in more or less most regions of the world, with a strong focus on North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific region. As I mentioned already, we are all here, and this was also one of the reasons that we quite early started to support IN4climate, is to decarbonize ourselves or to protect the climate, basically. And we made already quite some progress in that. When you compare our 1990 baseline of 750 kilograms per ton of cementitious material to our current performance, which is around 590 kilograms per ton of cementitious material. We already did something, but we want to go further, and this is quite important for us. We set ourselves a 2030 target to achieve a reduction compared to 1990 of 30%. And we are quite proud that we are the first cement company worldwide that achieved a quite good reduction, first of all, but also that the target that we set ourselves is actually verified by the so-called science-based targets initiative. So we are the first cement producer worldwide who has science-based targets, meaning that it's verified against the goals of the Paris Agreement to limit global warming below 2 degrees. To reach this 2030 target, we are looking into, let's say, conventional measures that we are taking already since quite a while. The first one is the utilization of alternative fuels. These are primarily waste-derived fuels with a high biomass content, which lowers our fuels emissions. Of course, we are an energy-intensive business, therefore energy efficiency is our daily business, and we are constantly investing into that. And the third element is basically the reduction of the clinker content in our cements. I will come back to that later. Clinker is basically calcined limestone, which is the foundation for cement, basically, because this is the material in the final cement that gives it the binding characteristics that it has when you put it with water together. So basically, cement is a glue, and clinker is the crucial component, and we are working with our R&D teams to reduce this clinker component. But as I mentioned, this is our 2030 target to go the full mile, and we are committed to do so. We have to do a little bit more. Our goal is basically to make concrete carbon neutral by 2050, the latest. For that, we are trying to reduce the clinker content and the general CO2 content in our products, the reduction of CO2 in our clinker by certain measures, the recycling of concrete, and I will come back to that later, and ultimately the capturing of CO2. And the capturing of CO2 is quite crucial for us because the process emissions or unavoidable volumes of CO2 in our process make up 2/3 of our direct emissions. And these come basically from the limestone. We quarry limestone in our quarries nearby, and limestone is basically CaCO3. We heat the raw material to 1,550 degrees. This is where our fuels-based emissions arise. And this heating of the raw material leads to the so-called calcination of limestone, which means that from a chemical perspective, CaCO3 leads to CaO and CO2. And this CO2 really makes up 2/3 of our direct emissions profile, while the fuels-based emissions only make up 1/3 of our emissions profile. And this we are tackling, as mentioned, via energy efficiency and the utilization of biomass and alternative fuels. And we are pushing that down, but these 2/3 of the process-based emissions remain, and these are a challenge. So what to do with that to become climate neutral by 2050? What we are looking into is CCUS, carbon capture and utilization or storage. And this is for us quite crucial, as we are heavy or huge CO2 source, to develop technologies and scale technologies to capture the CO2. We are basically looking into 3 technologies within our house, and this really on a global scale in different countries already. On the one hand, we are looking into so-called post-combustion technologies. Post-combustion technologies are quite interesting because they can be put in the end of an existing cement plant. So you do not have to transform the whole production process in itself. And you can capture basically the CO2 from the flue gas, usually by amine-based absorption of CO2. We are currently pioneering this technology in a few projects. The biggest and noteworthy is for sure the full-scale CCS project in Norway, where we intend to capture quite soon 50% of our Brevik plant and bring that CO2 to a Norwegian storage site. Furthermore, we are working on further feasibility studies to check if this technology is suitable and deployable in other sites within our group. And it's a quite interesting technology, as I said, but what you have to think about is that it's quite energy intensive, so you need some electricity to run all the installations, and also you need a heat source to revive the amines in the process, and this needs to be considered when implementing such a technology. Therefore, we are looking also into another technology. This is the direct capture technology called LILAC, and it's actually based on the indirect heating of limestone. So what we are actually doing is, as I've mentioned before, we have CO2 that is coming from the raw material, and we heat the raw material with an indirect manner. So there's a tube that is being heated where the raw material falls through. So what goes up is a pure CO2 gas stream. And we capture this separate CO2 gas stream during the calcination. And it's a technology that we pioneered so far in Belgium, where the first demonstrator was built 2 years ago. And we now decided to build a larger scale demonstrator in Germany quite soon. And meanwhile, we will still operate the Belgian demonstrator as well, and where we will test to even decarbonize the heating component in this direct capture process, either by going the route down of electrification or the utilization of alternative fuels, primarily biomass, potentially even green hydrogen. Then the third technology that we are looking into is the so-called Oxy Fuel Technology. And the Oxy Fuel Technology is really the cement plant of the future, in a sense. So it's a complete revamp of an existing cement plant, or if you would like to build a new one anyhow, I would say that this is a way to go a little bit. Basically, Oxy Fuel Technology describes cement production within a pure oxygen atmosphere. So you have ideal burning conditions to heat the raw material, and you know, in ideal burning conditions or combustion conditions, what do you have? You have water and CO2. So if you even then loop the CO2 within the process that is completely sealed off from the outside atmosphere, you can already enrich and increase the CO2 concentration in the flue gas, which makes it able to have a quite cost-efficient capture of the CO2, as there's already a rather high concentration of CO2 in your flue gas. We are still working on that technology, and we, together with a consortium of 3 other leading European cement manufacturers, are currently looking into build a first-of-kind installation in Germany. So if we have now the pure CO2 and we can really make it quite pure, what to do with that? And this is actually a huge topic for us as well, and this is where cross-sectional cooperation comes into play. So usually you can say that captured CO2 can either be stored or used in cooperation with different sectors. So when we look into the process, we have a flue gas with a CO2 content of, let's say, 25%. What we can do with the capture technologies is capture the CO2 concentrated to purity rates above 95%, or we can use it directly. And we are looking into both streams together with some partners. And we'll start on the left side with the concentration of CO2 to above 95%. First thing we could do is store the CO2. This might be one option that we could go down with. In view of the volumes, this might be even necessary for some residual amounts of CO2, but basically storage does not bring you value for your CO2. Then we are going to the utilization part. Chemicals, plastics, but also synthetic fuels, and many other applications in the chemical sector could be done with our CO2 in combination with hydrogen. So this is a route to go down, because with that it makes a quite interesting future circular economy. You could use it as well directly for recarbonation, meaning that the CaCO3 wants to become back or wants to be again limestone, and for that you can use concrete recycling, put CO2 on that, and this works quite well as well. Or you could even use bioreactors to create algae or biomass with the CO2. In the end, what we need for that is rather easy. This is a cooperation of the economy together with the society and politics, as Stefan and Michael mentioned. In the end, we need to discuss innovation, investment, a predictable legal framework, the necessary infrastructures, but also the acceptance by society, behavioral change, and the demand for green procurement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christoph, for this very good and comprehensive introduction into how cement industry, how Heidelberg is bound to really go to decarbonization, and also that you made this point that we need to cooperate on this. And I think we will hear more on this from another important company, from Hans-Jörn Weddige from ThyssenKrupp. And Hans-Jörn is personally very much involved also in IN4climate. He's leading the innovation, one of the innovation teams. And so I'm very happy to have him with us and to hear from his side how he perceives the challenges and what we can do. Hans-Jörn, please.
Thanks a lot. Actually, there will not be that much difference to what just Christoph said, just a different angle. What are we doing at ThyssenKrupp? Certainly, we are part of a value chain. It's about us and about our emissions, but it's equally about the emission of our customers. And certainly the question on how do we actually have a coherent sustainability approach governed so that it's not happening by accident, but by direction. Let me take you on a journey. We, as many others, have an ambition for 2050, which is to become climate neutral overall. This overall is important because if you look at our intermediate targets, yes, we are looking at the emissions from our own production, scope 1, scope 2, that's what we call implement, where we have an intermediate target, reduce it by 30% in 2030. However, our climate neutrality approach includes also our customers, and customers of ours are, for example, Heidelberg Cement. If you provide them with cement plants, and you just heard how big the CO2 footprint is, and that certainly needs to be addressed as well. So that's very important that we really look along the value chain. However, we are not doing it on our own, but we are trying to engage all the stakeholders we have on board. That's the customers, certainly the suppliers, but also all the other stakeholders, because at the end of the day, as it was mentioned, and that's why initiatives like IN4climate are there for, we only can do it together. It's not a job any of us can do on their own. However, how do we approach it? Let me take the example of hydrogen, where we certainly look at the issues of production and use. Using hydrogen, certainly for us being one of the major steel companies in the world and the biggest one in Germany, one of the issues certainly is a so-called direct reduction with hydrogen. So replace the existing blast furnace fleet, go to a different technology. However, we have actually started with something else because this is extremely capital intensive and takes time. So we have actually said, why don't we use the existing blast furnace, inject hydrogen into it, which is not able to replace carbon from coal completely, but at least able to make a significant contribution to reduce the emissions. We are, as of most of the others, looking at the direct reduction. However, we have developed a slightly novel approach by saying what we want to do is actually combine it with an electric melter in order to produce a product which is actually equivalent to the classical hot metal we produce in the blast furnace. Why is that? Seem to have a problem to... Okay, now it's coming slowly, at least from my screen. Taking the classical route, the integrated concept, the issue is definitely on the hot metal side and the preparatory states, coke ovens and whatever else. Most of what we are currently finding in the literature and the announcement of companies is saying, fine, we replace that by direct reduction, go to electric arc furnace, go into novel casting processes. So we have a lot of capex to be built new. Given the constraints, we decided we do something different. We actually replace the blast furnace by a novel combination of a direct reduction unit and an electric melter, and go back into the old process because we have all the capital, and actually we have hence replaced the CO2 emission sources, but kept everything that allows us to produce exactly the qualities we have been doing so far. We are also including that with an approach that not only has the hydrogen parts which you find on the upward part of the slide, but also looks at carbon capture and use, what Christopher just mentioned, in order to give us a holistic approach to actually reducing emissions and really come towards green steel on all quality levels. Now, however, the big issue is what we will be needing is a lot of hydrogen. Where does it actually come from? So water electrolysis certainly is the source for green sustainable hydrogen we all need. This is again something we are producing, and here it's very important to look at the fact that there's still a lot to be done regarding plant engineering, modern manufacturing, and so on and so forth. And that, for example, is something where a platform, again, like IN4climate becomes important, that we actually work together on that, because we are at the moment at the brink of really becoming commercial in the size that we can roll it out. The big advantage we have is that we are actually using a technology we have tried for 50 years in chlorine electrolysis and just adapted to water electrolysis, and hence, as we have shown in Duisburg, are really able to produce it at the scale that's needed. What's needed? Renewable energy generation. And here it's very important. It's not all about new novel. Some of that is very old. We look at ball bearings. Without something turning, nothing will work. So it's very important that we really look at linkages, also including all the industries, and not think there's a new green one emerging. No, we need certainly very classical ones. Even more so, if you look at mining, we need iron ore. We will need it irrespective whether we go for coke or hydrogen. And certainly, as we are a mining equipment producer, we are looking at the issue because we all know taking stuff out of the ground is difficult to be regenerative and to be sustainable. However, it has to be. We know the issue about trucks moving, so what can we do? Also here, it's very important to see, yes, we can do a lot, because also modern mining concepts can be fed by renewable energies, can be sure to address not only the climate issue, but all the sustainable development goals of the UN, because we will need the physical stuff also in future. We will need it not only in terms of steel, we need it in terms of chemical plants, which we are producing. Here again, hydrogen, for example, plays an important role, because this is basically what you can do with hydrogen and other products like CO2. Behind that is actually hiding what Christopher mentioned in what do we do with the CO2, and you see actually a cement plant, if you look closely to your left, as one of the potential CO2 sources. Again, the issue about, so to speak, green molecules, how we get the base chemicals in a way that's actually climate friendly and sustainable. Oxy fuels, I don't want to go much into that because Christopher mentioned it. Very important is they are not needing hydrogen as such, but as Christoph said, the issue certainly is they emit CO2, and unavoidably, same as we emit CO2 in the steel industry, for example, today. And this is exactly why, for example, carbon to chem as a CCU unit comes into play, where we actually have shown in Duisburg that we can produce the base chemicals. You see a few here. We have by now produced many more. And we do it at the end of the day on the right-hand side of the screen, not because we like the engineering, but this is what we need for society, the green steels, the green chemicals, the green cement. Because, and this is not on the screen, then to the right, you will have unfolding all the value chains, be it automotive, be it construction, and so on and so forth. And that's exactly what we need to do. That we certainly advance our customers to succeed with such green products and technologies, that we at the same time as industry address the climate neutrality issue in-house, because certainly this also has an important impact if we do it wrongly, and that at the end, hopefully, shows you why we are quite firm that we can actually approach these things, but to make it very clear, not on our own, but only by looking at the value chain, by speaking and working with partners, and by making sure to use platforms such as IN4climate in order to be sure we are aligned and work together on that. Thank you very much, and I hope I was able to give you a bit of an insight of what's actually hiding behind these catchy phrases of, say, hydrogen economy in real life in industry. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thanks a lot, Hans-Jörn, for this very interesting presentation, and also very concise. So maybe we have time for one question from the audience. It was to, I think, both of you, but maybe we can pose it first to you and later come to it back. So the question is, most oil and gas companies are starting to diversify towards alternative energies, so renewable energies. So are the cement and steel companies also investing in alternative materials as part of their sustainability strategy? So I think wood or biogeneous materials is meant here. So what do you think of this strategy?
Maybe I just start a bit, because I think it's directly looking towards cement and alternative binders. Yes, indeed, we are looking into that, and this is already current practice. So when you look into cement, it's a normed or standardized product. There's different cement norms and standards for the products, and this clinker component is already being reduced. To give you an example, for Germany, in Germany, CEM1, which is really 100% clinker-based cement or classical Portland cement, makes up roughly 26% of the whole market. The other cement types in CEM2, CEM3, these are so-called composite cements, which have clinker substitutes in, and this I showed also in our graph. We have a clinker factor group-wide globally of 75% due to these materials that we are marketing. And these contain, for example, blast furnace slag from the steel industry that we are using as a clinker substitute, or fly ash, or pozzolana as other clinker substitutes. But you can only substitute clinker to a certain extent, because otherwise you get quality issues with your cement, and also cement, or especially the concrete afterwards, gets a little bit unpredictable when it goes to hardening time. And this is quite crucial when applying it in the construction, basically. There's also, and we are doing research on that as well, the discussion of alternative binders, which have a different component than clinker. And there the situation is as follows, that research is going on, but basically it's currently not really relevant for the market, and it will likely not be very relevant for the overall market in the future. It will, so our European Cement Association says it will have a market share of 5% basically. And the background for that is that the materials will be much, much more expensive, and the raw materials availability for the raw materials that you need to produce these alternative binders is not there. So to give you a figure, it's a high volume product that we are selling. So worldwide, 4.2 billion tons of cement have been produced last year, which equaled more than 20 billion tons of concrete in the end of the day. So you need a cheap, large volume product, and these alternative binders unfortunately cannot do that. And for the classical binders based on cement, you will still need clinker for a certain amount.
Thank you. Now we are almost all clinker experts. Maybe Hans-Jörn, you also want to have one sentence on the question?
Quick comment, yes and no. Because some materials we just can't substitute. The base of electrification is and will be ferrous material, because it's the only stuff that's able to turn motion into electricity and vice versa. Hence, we need to be able to continue to produce these materials, however, in a green way. May I also quickly jump, I've seen there's another question. CapEx, yes, it is extremely important in the steel industry, and there's a rule of thumb that works for classical as modern. For about 1 million tons of annual production, you need about €1 billion for investment. However, the operational costs are much higher. So It's not just about providing the capex, it's really about making sure the framework operates. The rest of the afternoon and barring you from going to the panel, or just briefly say it all depends, because we have to see how it works. How do you deal with steel coming in through cars? How do you deal with plastics coming in through mobile phones? How do you border tax on that? Unless you specify what that is, you can't really give it a scale on whether it works or not, but it would be most probably a conference on its own right. Stefan, we can't hear you.
Yes.
Okay.
Now you're back. Now you're back on.
Thank you. Yes, definitely a big question, but strange. Yeah, thank you. I think that's a big question, and maybe we can come back to it later in the discussion. Also to all the other questions to Christoph and Hans-Jörn. But now I would like to hand over to our guests from the energy agencies. And the energy agencies who have undertaken it to really bring industry together and to help industries join forces. And both our industry representatives highlighted how important that is. But maybe we can hear more on what you are doing and how you perceive it. And I'm very happy to start with Rainer van Loon from Energieagentur Nordrhein-Westfalen. He's cooperating also with IN4climate, and also we have been working in many other contexts. So very much looking forward for your take on the topic.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to this panel. And I have prepared a few slides, and they should appear on screen right now, I hope. Okay, here's the first one. And while the slides go through, and I will just do my talk. Okay, I hope you can hear me well. North Rhine-Westphalia is the most important industrial region in Germany. We have already heard that. And of course, one of the most productive in Europe. Our region has long been successful economically with an industrial base centered around the coal and steels, chemical, machinery, metal, and automobile industries. The region's industrial activity emits roughly 60 million tons of CO2 annually, which is almost 23% of the region's economy-wide emissions. NRW is also home to Europe's largest iron and steel site in the city of Duisburg. Hans-Jörn has already mentioned this. Accounting for just over 35% of total industrial emissions, the iron and steel sector will soon be a key driver for hydrogen deployment across North Rhine-Westphalia. Of particular importance is the sector's largest site mentioned above, which is aiming to convert all its blast furnaces to hydrogen in 2022, followed by converting other sites to direct reduction plants and electric arc furnaces in the 30s, and integrating carbon utilization technology for carbon neutrality by 2050. This we have already heard before also. North Rhine-Westphalia's fuel consumption across all sectors is dominated by coal and lignite. Still, we all know this, but there is also significant usage of electricity and gas in other key sectors like chemicals, cement, lime, glass, non-ferrous metals, among others. Electricity generation is currently dominated by fossil fuels, but it is transitioning also through the national stepping out of coal to be zero carbon by 2050. NRW's climate policy supports a resilient pathway to achieving emissions reduction in industry. This is further supported with the region's industrial carbonization planning. Strategies and instruments including actions on increasing energy and resource efficiency with loans and the expansion of cogeneration. The state government also promotes technology research and development in the area of process-related emissions reductions. interdisciplinary instruments promote economic strategy and market competition alongside innovative solutions for environmental protections in small and medium-sized companies. Now I go to the next slide and want to talk about the importance of federal states and regions on in the climate field, because we see that they are important actors when it comes to reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement. They're not only closer to industry and society, but often they're more ambitious than national states are. North Rhine-Westphalia has been working with the climate group for many years and has become a very active member of the Under 2 coalition. Here we exchange climate policies and measures with our global partners through projects like the Industry Transition Platform. IN4climate is also involved in this project. Now let me talk a bit about the Energy Agency of North Rhine-Westphalia. It has been working for 30 years in key areas such as energy research, technology development, demonstration and deployment, energy consulting, first of all, and public awareness, as well as the vocational training. It aims to promote the development of innovative energy technologies in North Rhine-Westphalia and provide neutral guidance on energy efficiency and renewable energy to industry and municipalities. Target group in the industrial sector are most of all small and medium-sized enterprises who in many cases do not have the staff and knowledge to systematically target and reach climate goals. The region also hosts the IN4climate platform that has already been introduced here, so I will just mention it briefly. IN4climate, with its specific working groups and its systematical approach to work with stakeholders in the region, is in our eyes a very good way to target these climate goals in the energy intensive industry. They mostly work with big companies who have big emissions, but the innovative thinking, the trust and the cooperation are, in our eyes, the key factors for success of this joint activity among the stakeholders. And that is what I wanted to say. I personally work a lot on this side of exchange, international cooperation and networking, and I think it's a very vital key to reach goals, because we cannot do it all ourselves within our regions. We need partners, we need exchange, we need to know how others approach these goals, and we can learn from each other. And the interesting aspect of that is the different way of thinking and approach that you find in other global areas. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks a lot, Rainer. I hope one can hear me. That was very good, and also very good that you emphasize how important also international collaboration is, and that's why we are here today. And now I am very happy to have Clara Hellstad here from Swedish Energy Agency. Originally, we wanted to be here with you in Sweden, and now you are in Sweden, and we are split over Europe and the world. But anyway, we are happy that we have this technology and we can have your presentation here and your thoughts and how you are doing it in Sweden. Please,
Thank you
Clara.
very much, Stefan. So we are living in a time of transition. Since the Paris meeting, we have seen a clear shift among industries in Sweden
focusing much more on reducing emissions and reach our new climate targets. If the climate challenges are to be resolved, sustainable solutions must have an impact much faster than today. The energy system must undergo transformation, and that is something that will affect all parts of the society. Research and innovation are providing new technologies, new knowledge that make the transition possible. And we at the Swedish Energy Agency has overall responsibility for energy transition in Sweden. And we support all types of research and innovation projects, business development, and the global distributions of new solutions. One inspiring example is the initiative Fossil-Free Sweden that has played an important role the latest years in the transition. The initiative encouraged business sectors to draw up their own roadmaps how the sector will be fossil-free while increase competitiveness. And today we actually have 22 different roadmaps for different sectors. This has played a very important role in understanding from different parts of society what is actually needed to reach climate targets. As we see it, Swedish industries counts for 1/3 of the Swedish greenhouse gas emissions. And we see that the several solutions are necessary to decarbonize the industry. Different combinations of technologies is needed and need to be developed, while at the same time we need to develop market demand and policy and regulations. So this is a very complex transition we are heading into. And one important reform the latest years has been the mission, the Industrial Leap, where we support huge and complex technology leaps to radically reduce process-related emissions and support negative emissions BECCS. Actually, the government has proposed some even more different types of projects areas lately, and we will see what happens from 2021. We can support all types of research and innovation, plus investments. Oh, sorry for the sound. According to the state aid rules, of course. And I would like to give you 2 examples on ongoing initiatives with a strong collaboration with universities and also research institutes. One of the most well-known initiatives right now is hybrid. Today, 3 pilot projects are ongoing and a large research project. The result will be a fossil-free steel-making technology from iron ore to final product. This investment has a large potential in cutting emissions, of course. And this is I would say, a very strong collaboration project for the society. Another example is the collaboration project is to decrease the emissions from the Preem refinery at the Swedish west coast. This project will demonstrate carbon capture, and together with Norwegian partners, the project will focus on the carbon capture and storage value chain, policies, legislation to reach an energy and cost-effective value chain. Finally, I would like to draw some conclusions how to accelerate transition. What we see is a very positive development the latest years, and that is founded on consensus on goals, joint action and collaboration. Now we need to accelerate the pace of innovation, And we also need to develop policies and regulations and upscale technologies. So this is what we could see right now. And thank you for your attention. Sorry, I can't hear you, Stefan.
Shall we move on to our final presentation for this morning's session, I believe, which is Thomas Gordon from ADEME in France. Bear with me and I will just load up your slides, Thomas.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation. So my name is Thomas Gordon. I'm working from the French Environmental Transition Agency. And I'm working as deputy head of the industry department, which is in charge of decarbonization of the industry. So from energy efficiency to renewable and until, let's say, CCS. And we've got as well in charge, we are in charge of the hydrogen deployment plan, which is a huge task at this stage. Is it just let me... Yes. So the DNA of the agency is really to be at the junction of the science or technology, the economic, and the policy part. And we are supporting the ministry to develop policies in order to support the transition. So this presentation is really in line with the previous one from the Clara in Sweden. And I just want to highlight 3 steps in the policy process development. So the study, the design, and the implementation. About the study, I think it has been talked about before, but it's very important to share common vision between industries and policymakers. And we need to, let's say, agree more or less. I think more or less is important because we can't agree on all at this stage, but more or less on where to go. So in the agency, we launched 9 transition plans. So it's not 22, but 9 for 9 sectors in the industry. So this is cement, this is iron and steel, this is ethylene, chlorine, ammonia, sugar, and all the, let's say, the usual suspects on the industry. In those transition plans, our intent is to really deep dive the technology aspect, the economic aspects, the employment and market aspects, and the policy aspects. So now we've got the first results about the cement, but we are running in parallel 3 other sectors. What we see is that we need to actively look at 3 main levers each time. So the sobriety, and behind the sobriety, we are talking about the demand side. The demand side is very important. The energy mix, so sobriety is demand side, but it's as well energy efficiency and material efficiency and so on. The energy mix, we talked a little bit about that before, but we know that we are going to have limited resource of renewable electricity, and biomass as well is limited. So there will be a huge constraint on the utilization of decarbonized energy. And we've got CCS at the end of the day. I want to say that it's important to be aligned, and I will take the example of CCS, which has been addressed before. CCS, for example, in France, is difficult to implement. I think it's very easy to implement it in a model, so to design CCS in all the model, but we need to face with concrete life, concrete ground, and concrete technological and economical constraints. And for CCS, for example, in the cement company, which has a huge necessity to go for this technology because of the process emissions that has been explained before, we arrived at a point where only 20% of the 28 cement plants in France are, let's say, eligible to CCS. So only 20%. That means that 80% of the plants will, at this stage, will meet difficulty to go for CCS. So here the important point is really to land with a common vision about what is really feasible and when is it feasible. This is the study part. When we are quite aligned, we need to design the policy. And I think here it's really important to address the specificities of the industry sector. Compared to the transport sector or the building sector or the agriculture sector, for the industry side, on the industry side, we are really, let's say, playing with a quite limited number of players and quite a limited number of zones. And in that sense, from a policy design viewpoint, we are really on ADEM's side pushing for, let's say, haute couture policy, you know, really tailor-made policies and one-to-one deal between a company and the public authority. And it's not the same compared to transport or building when you have to address millions of buildings or millions of cars. And this should be a force to have this fine-tuned approach. The specificities, I think questions were raised on this, is related to CapEx. We are facing, let's say, a double investment need. The first one is a revamping side. I know that Wuppertal Institute and other NGOs proposed and published a study in Germany more or less one year ago about the necessity to revamp the industry. In France, it's quite the same. What is frustrating about revamping is that it costs you a lot, like for a cement company, and I think Heidelberg could adjust a little bit my figures, but it's between 200 million and 300 million. But the problem is that you will not abate a lot of CO2, but it is a necessary step. So it's really complicated to address, but you need to take this on board when you need to design policy, and it's an important aspect. And the second point is innovation. I think we had two examples just before, but innovation is needed because we do not have the solution which are mature just now. So you really need to invest on innovation and on policy side to support innovation. And after that, you need to create the condition for the market to support the fact that there will be green products. And here I think we are going to talk about the role of green public procurements, and more or less to address the OPEX and the impact of such CapEx costs onto the production cost and the operating cost. So meaning that the market should accept the fact that you need to pay more in order to have green products. On the implementation side, I think the quote from Churchill has really been mentioned a lot of time during this last 6 months. And I think it was quite successful. I mean, the COVID-19 is really a massive game changer, at least in terms of recovery plan. So French recovery plan was published 2 weeks ago, which is a 100 billion euro plan, and 30% of it, so 30 billion, are dedicated to the environmental transition. It's, I mean, unprecedented. In 2008, it was not the case. And it's really important to include this point into the context. The question now is industry sector ready to invest? Because there will be a lot of money, but industry needs to be confident in the market. And for my typical example, we managed to get 200 million euros to spend for the decarbonization of industry, but this 200 million euros needs to be spent before Christmas. And I mean, it's crazy. There is a lot of money. The question is, what about the project and the industry side? And I think it's really important to have this dialogue with the industry. And I think the next step for politics and policymakers for the next decade is to accept the idea of winner and loser. I think in the industry, now it's very clear that some actors are preparing the future and some are maybe late. And I think for policymakers, it will be a crucial period to understand this point, and it will need some courageous action related to this fact. Thank you very much.
I think over to you, Michael.
Okay. I was just waiting to see if Stefan has sound. If not, I'm just trying to distribute a few questions here. Staying with the agency side, thanks everybody for the presentations. I'm just looking at the chat. What questions we have? There was a question for Rainer, but I think I can give it to all three of you. Is how do you perceive the state's wiggle room, the state's wiggle room, as well as the regional wiggle room when it comes to all these federal and European regulations? So, how much can we do on the state level, as well as government, and as agencies as well? Whoever likes to go first.
So maybe I start on that point. So of course, let's put it like that: the European law as it is, and also federal law in Germany, they are like the corset in which you operate, basically. But still, even if the corset might be tight, there is still always some wiggle room in that. And I would say the Green Deal especially, and the agenda of Ms. von der Leyen really loosened the corset a little bit. So I think the wiggle room, in fact, increased a little bit, also due to the green recovery packages and the whole political discussion that is going on around the Green Deal. Because depending on what she will say, for example, today in her State of the Union address with regards to emission reduction targets for 2030, that this is mainly the broader framework in which we have to operate with a goal, but a lot of policies are not yet set or will be revised. To give you an example, if I remember correctly, the Green Deal encompasses in total 57 proposals. So there is still some wiggle room as these policies have to be designed also for regional states, and initiatives like IN4climate, for example, they are quite well placed to inform the states or the politics as well how to maneuver in this wiggle room and make the best out of that, because I think this is the crucial thing. We are discussing topics like infrastructure, we are discussing topics like green procurement, so having the upstream and the downstream topic from an intermediate industry perspective on that. And there you can shape actually quite a lot also as a regional government in the end of the day. To give you a clear example, do you have green public procurement rules that are based on life cycle assessment or full life cycle assessments for your own construction that you're doing? For example, for my sector, as I mentioned, a third to a half of our products is going to the public hand.
Thanks. Anybody likes to add something to that?
I would like to add a sentence. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. States or on the federal state level, it is true that the competences are not as big as on the national level, and this is also different in diverse countries. But a climate policy by a region is very important also on a political level. If a leadership in a federal state or region says, we want to be climate neutral, we want to go this way, we want to work with our stakeholders, then this makes a big difference, because the echo in the media is different. Let's take another example. If a federal state says, we are opposing this, we don't want, say, new power lines, we don't want to see no new wind farms, then the outcome is a negative one. So this is an example how how big the range is. It is important on the political level to act, and that's why we think we need to do that.
Yes, I may add the fact that I'm quite agree with what has been said. I think there is a great need to align policy from European to national into regional aspects. I mean, some of the technology we were talking about CCS need to land somewhere at one time, and it's very easy to have this CCS speech at very high level because it's easy because you are talking almost to nobody. So, but if you really want it to happen, you need to say, okay, I will capture air, I will purify air, I will transport air, and I will store it here. And when you go for that, you enter into some tricky question about social acceptance, about industrial risk, about cooperation between industries, because you need to share some part of the investment, and you need to talk about your data and what are really, what is the purity of your CO2 and so on and so on. And this is where the regional aspect is very important, because the situation will be debated at regional aspects. And I think if there is a global frame that say, okay, in this specific country, we won't go for CCS, it's very important to know it before. And then you need to discuss at the right place. So I think technology are really, let's say, some of them are really have an impact or are dependent about the local constraint. Biomass is the same. You can't offer like a project with lots of biomass, which are going to be important from the other part of the world, or even the other part of the Europe. And you need to have a regional or national plan that will provide you some biomass. You need to agree on it. And the interconnection with all the policy parts of the different players are very important.
Clara, if you'd like to add something, just let me know. Otherwise,
I totally agree with my colleagues from the other energy agencies. It must be done on all different levels, locally, regionally, nationally, within the European Union, for instance. It's necessary at all levels.
Yeah, what I think from an IN4climate perspective and from international dialogue is that all the industrial regions, the traditional industrial regions in Europe are facing the same problems and the same tasks, and that by cooperating and getting our problems known to higher political levels, I think we should be able to influence these federal and European frameworks to better fit on what we have to do, what we are trying to do with industry transition. I think we just slide into the general discussion right now. I have some more questions from the chat to Christoph and Hans-Jörn for an industry perspective, but I just like to begin with one more questions to the agency partners. So we're all working on this industry transition. We don't have formal powers. We're dealing in influence. What's interesting me to hear from you is who do you think are the actors who need to be pushed the most, who need to be influenced the most? Is it politics that we should direct our communications to and direct our wishes to? Is it the industry base, or is it the public? What is your experience? What are your opinions on that?
Clara, you want to go or you want me to go?
Well, I could just say that I think it's somehow you have to see the whole combination of different actors within the transition. And of course, it's no. I think the industry could be very, or must be very clear. What are the keys to reach the goals and go through with different decisions points, etc. So if you could talk more openly about what to do and what you are planning to do, if it's then it's easier for the politicians and the energy agency, for instance, to understand and perhaps develop policy and regulations, finding new ways of supporting the transition, etc. So that I think dialogue and listening and be very clear and open with plans, etc. That could be one way.
Yeah, I want to maybe to top up on that and about transparency. I think both sides, policy and industry, should be more transparent because industry asks for a perspective, a clear vision that is not going to move. So set the rules well before the rules are going to be implemented. So let's have a 10-year vision about what is going to be the corridor of CO2, what is going the corridor of regulation, and then the market will play the role. On the other side, I think it's very important, at least for national operators as us, to have clear confidence about the plans, the industrial plans. And I will take one example. And I congratulate Heidelberg to be the first cement company to have a science-based target approved in terms of goal of reduction. And I will encourage you to decline it and at national level. We know that the Paris Agreement is worldwide level. The neutrality will not apply to each people or each company. We need to land at a global level, but we need to have confidence about what is the declination of your objective at national level. Otherwise, you can't be very confident about, okay, are you really going to invest in my country? Because you are thinking, when I say you is multinational and the industry sector are global company, and they think about global market, global capex, how to allocate capex, and so on. We know that sometimes there is more fight internally in each company than externally with competitor about the capex allocation and so on. And I think we need to have this debate at least at national level to bring confidence. The second point maybe I want to highlight might be the role, to respond to your question, Michael, might be the role of the green finance. I think because there is a lot of money now with the recovery plan, and before that, there's been lots of momentum about climate finance. European Commission is going to prepare the stabilization of the taxonomy, and this is an important infrastructure to support investor for clean or green investment. And I think in terms of players, we know that they are going to put pressure on the industry as well as on policymakers about climate neutrality and so on. So I think finance is a player that we should take on board and consider.
Thanks, Thomas. Rainer, anything to add?
I would sum up and say that from my perspective, all levels interact. And if you see the development in climate protection then one could say that it is a sad thing that we are at the point where we are now. We could have been at this point maybe 10 years ago. But for that to happen, the UN Climate Conference in Copenhagen would have, to be successful, but it wasn't. So the global level is very important in setting goals and in reaching global agreement. But to make things happen in the nations, in the areas, in the regions, you need national states, you need regions, and you need to reach the people. And the consciousness for the climate problems, the consciousness for the changing climate and the changing weather has increased dramatically in the last few years, and we see the outcomes in our work. So all actors need to go together, and they need to do that now.
Thanks. We may have Stefan back. That's what I heard.
Yeah, we may. So can you hear me? Then I'm back. Sorry, I can hear you all the time, but the other way around is difficult. But maybe you were so well in moderating, I don't want to interrupt, but there just came in a question again on the agencies. So maybe we have still time for that one. And this is on the cooperation between public and private stakeholders. And the question says it requires trusts and new business models and infrastructure. And so the question is, can you comment on how public authorities can help the process forward here? So maybe this is again on our agency representatives, and maybe we are allowed to have that in advance before we come back to the more industry related questions.
On this, maybe one point. I think on political side is really dependent on the citizens and public opinion, and I think we are living a shift now, at least in France, which is very important about the aspiration of the public to go for a green transition with young people, Greta, and so on. I think it's really a turning point now that we are living. It's slow. As you said, Rainer, we could have been at this stage maybe 10 years ago after Copenhagen, but it was not the case, maybe because citizens were not ready. I think now it's really moving. And on that side, political decisions are much more comfortable to take to support these new business models and trust and infrastructure. But I think politicals are learning maybe not as fast as citizens. And now we are really on the stage where politicals needs to be much more educated. And to take one example, to get this point between the cooperation and so on, we need consistency in terms of policy. And now we are not full consistent because politics are irritating, so have the past in their basket, and are still supporting fossil fuel by tax exemption and so on for competitiveness and so on. And this kind of policy is not consistent with other policy. And when there will be a good alignment of policy, I think this will bring confidence from the industrial side to say, okay, we won't go on the past, and the transition is really supported at all the stages of the policy. And I think it should be an important step to move forward, is consistency with all the policy.
Thanks a lot. Thomas, are there also opinions from the other two?
Yes, maybe one point on the whole issue of transparency that has been mentioned. I fully agree that we have to increase dialogue between politics, society, and industry, especially when it comes to the low-carbon breakthrough technologies. I think Thomas mentioned it already. It's a huge question of social acceptance also for these newest technologies, especially the technologies carbon capture and utilization and carbon capture and storage that are relevant for our industry. And this leads also to the question of credibility or transparency, as you have put it. And in principle, I agree with you, but it's difficult, and sometimes I have to say. I mean, we are all discussing new technologies. We are discussing breakthrough technologies, basically. And competition is something that we play as industrial players, we have to say. So we are companies, so we want to make some money. And when I look into my industry, for example, there's a clear reason why we are or see ourselves and try to be the front runners when it comes to climate protection. One hand is our own commitment based on our values, but it's also money to be made with that in the end of the day. And we should be quite clear about that. I would frame it that way, that if we are not the early birds in pioneering the further or the full-fledged decarbonization of our industries, we might be the guys who have to pay more in the end of that. It's a competitive advantage if we are earlier than others, if the CO2 pricing is right. And when we see that in Europe, for example, CO2 has a price, additional policies come in Germany as well. So there is an economic incentive to move on that route. But to be fully transparent on that route is quite difficult from a competition reason. So therefore, I cannot much go into details. I saw the question on the Oxy Fuel Technology. I cannot give you all the details on cost of retrofits. Maybe ThyssenKrupp can elaborate a little bit more on that. But from our perspective, I can only tell it's possible. But this is also one of the reasons why we check the other technologies as well, to be a little bit open and find the most cost-efficient solution for ourselves and the different plants that we operate, basically. But unfortunately, we cannot say too much more on that because our competitors might be listening as well. And I would be happy to hear the same from our competitors, of course.
Okay, thank you for
Maybe
that.
Perhaps
comment. Hans-Jörn, please.
Stefan, a comment on that one. The aim is not to get you in contact with our sales department. However, certainly you can do that. And it's important, yes, we do retrofit in Oxy Fuel plants because, and that I think is very important in the heavy industries, we must not forget we are looking at lifetimes of plants of 30, 40, 50 years. Hence, we need solutions. This is what I quickly brushed over when I spoke about injection of hydrogen into an existing blast furnace. This is exactly for the reason that we must be aware of the fact that there is a limited amount of capital available, not only in industry, but equally in society at large, which we can invest, and we have to be choosing that very wisely. I would like to pick up on this issue of business models, because I think, to be very blunt and actually a little bit provocative, I think we are not yet aware of the fact that we as industry will be providing two different kinds of products in the coming decades. The one is the cement, the plastics, the steel, as we have been doing. And there is a market for that will be sold in a private contract to some customer. The other product we are increasingly producing, climate mitigation, is different because that's a public good. And this makes it extremely complicated to find a proper market for it. And the CO2 price is not a substitute for a market there. And that's the reason why we are coming into an interesting situation that we will be needing public contracts. We will be needing new business models in which we can interact with society to provide the service society needs, everyone wants, but not a single person is willing to pay for it. However, it costs a lot of money to produce it. So there will be new business models, but not of the way perhaps intended in the questions, but in a real radical new form.
Yeah, thanks a lot for these important insights. I think Clara also had a remark. Is that right, Clara?
Yes, I was thinking about what could an agency do to support collaboration in different ways. And of course, we could do many different things, networking, support projects, etc. But of course, we have a certain degree, only a certain degree of freedom, because on a political level, it's decided each agency's kind of mission. And of course, we could also go to the political level and ask for new missions, etc. If we could identify the necessary activities to do. And of course, it's also important that the whole state, kind of all the agencies, for instance, within Sweden, that we have a strong collaboration between us. For instance, when it comes to permits, support, innovation, etc. So it's there collaboration on many different levels, I would say.
Oh, yes, thank you. I think that's very important, and probably we have to think also about next level of engagement of the agency and policy. I would now like to hand over back to Michael. You made it so great. I think you also have another comment.
Yeah, I just had a short side comment on the topic of trust, because we're talking a lot about trust when it comes to private and public stakeholders working together on industry transition. But one of the topics we're dealing with in IN4climate, and we're talking about for decades now, without even scratching the surface, is this whole field of circular economy. We're just at the beginning. And circular economy is a lot about cooperation between companies. And there's not just new business models in circular economy, there's also the need for complete different management models inside the companies, as well as in intercorporate corporations. And that's one field of activity where I think networks and agencies can play a role in providing the necessary trust between companies. Just that as a side note, not to start a whole new discussion here. I'd like to take one question from the Q&As and hand them to Christoph and Hans-Jörn, and that's the quite important question that of course you can reduce CO2 emissions with new process technologies, but a main reason for CO2 emissions could be that the demand for these primary materials just drops. I personally fail to get this vision with just 50% steel and 50% cement, but I think you're discussing this at Heidelberg Cement and at ThyssenKrupp. How just let me ask you, how do you expect the demand to develop to 2050, and have you strategies to tackle a possible drop in demand for primary materials?
Maybe I pick up, and I think it's quite crucial what you're looking into, basically, when you look into our product. Are you looking into the clinker? Are you looking into the cement? Or are you looking basically in the end product, concrete? And when you look into concrete, let's start with that. So when you look into all major macroeconomic trends for the future, urbanization will grow, population growth, etc., it's actually saying that you likely will need more construction materials that you're currently needing. Having said that, of course, you can further reduce the clinker component, and you can also optimize construction, keywords like building information, modeling, modular construction, etc. So you can gain resource efficiency there, especially in the construction part. And this is what will likely be happening. Meanwhile, that the market or the market demand for the end products, the construction materials, will grow in the end. We will see likely a little bit less clinker production, of course, because of optimized cements and then also optimized concrete recipes in the end of the day. And also looking into substitution, that will happen as well. So a huge debate is in Germany going on wood versus concrete, for example, in construction. And when you look into these things, it's relatively easy said, oh yeah, wood or timber has no CO2 footprint, basically, as a construction material. But you have to consider what you're doing with that. So it's about longevity, it's about durability of your construction as well. So, I mean, there will be anyhow a market. I cannot imagine that huge bridges will be built out of wood again. So there will be for sure a market. Maybe we lose a little bit in the housing sector, in the private housing sector. But even there, what you see, it's a hybrid construction. So usually your foundation is concrete still, and it will also be for wood building. So I do not see a huge reduction potential in the material. Having said that, and leading back to the issue of circular economy, this is actually what we are looking into. So what I showed on my slides as one route for the utilization of the CO2 is recarbonation. So what we are looking into as a vertically integrated construction materials manufacturer is to use the CO2 for our own construction materials. So if in theory, or what we are also testing already in piloting is, you can recycle concrete. So you demolish the building, recycle the concrete, and you get a rough fraction, which is basically the sand and gravel, and you get a fine fraction. Usually this fine fraction is so far not really being used. But you could recarbonate this fine fraction with CO2 and close the loop within our group. So one part of that is basically being limestone, again, when it's being carbonated with CO2. Another component when it's carbonated with CO2 is a clinker substitute. So you can really utilize the CO2 in a circular economy approach within our own industry. And this basically drives also down the virgin raw materials demand ultimately as well. And of course, we are looking also into smarter products like carbon concrete, etc. But you have to always, and this is please something that everybody should consider, and especially politics, is have a systemic or holistic view on that, because we're currently focusing very much on the climate debate, and especially in material substitution, if you just narrow it down to that, you might take wrong decisions. So you should discuss recyclability, end of life, and use phase of constructions, especially all together, and look if there's an impact on biodiversity, if recyclability is there, and so on. This needs to be thought holistically. Otherwise, we might see some quite bad unintended consequences in the end of the day.
I may follow up on that and perhaps enrich it a little bit. Yes, that's exactly the issue. We have these two trends, particularly globally, and we have globally both a demand for more services, standard of living, and so on and so forth. And we have a global demand for definitely more, not only climate protection, not without reason on the mining chart, I have just briefly highlighted the whole SDG spectrum, because it's not just about climate, it's also about the rest. I would, Michael, if I may, disagree a little bit with the circular economy statement you made, with the part that looks backward. It's a little bit, when we speak about circular economy, it's a little bit like speaking about the grammar of our own language, having seen the discussion in the chat, because we are doing it so often and so intensely that we don't really know how to articulate sometimes what we are doing. When we internally at ThyssenKrupp and the whole group started to look at circular economy, Surprisingly enough, those who have been doing it for 8,000 years, the steel guys, did not participate because they considered circular economy to be something new and didn't realize it's actually what's part of the business model, because 20% of today's input into a steel plant is scrap actually on an integrated steel plant, not an electric arc furnace that goes to about 100% if needed. And this, I think, is very important, that we do realize there are many things we have done. If some of you happen to have an old steel can, say Coca-Cola, standing around from 30 years ago, just lift it up and compare it to a modern one. Actually, today, you are quite glad if you have a carbonated drink, because as soon as you open it and the pressure from the carbonation is out, you realize how fragile the can actually becomes because it's so thin. It's about a 90% reduction compared to what it was 30, 40 years ago. So these trends are already happening and they continue to happen. As I also said, there are limits to it. Certain parts, electrical steels, the stuff we need in order to build generators, motors, transformers, we will need more of it, we will need better ones of it, yes, but we are not able to see a materials substitution here or a reduction in demand. On others, yes, we see things coming up, but we also believe there are business models to accommodate that. Because at the end of the day, to be very blunt and actually fall into a classical stereotype, a company is not about making a product, a company is about being successful on the market, and hence we have an interest to see what's happening in the market. If the market demands something different, it's our job to either fulfill that demand or eventually to leave the business because we have no right to be there anymore.
Okay, thank you, Hans-Jörn, for this important reflection. I think that leads us to another very important issue. You already also said, you said now a company is to be successful in the market, but I think you also discussed about the climate service that companies are having to deliver in the future. So maybe that's an interesting thing. And I know from Sweden that their steel industry has put very much on the forefront that they are there to create societal value. So I think our companies have to change also here. Of course, you have to be successful on the market, otherwise you will not be there anymore. But I think the future is developing into a direction that companies really have to do even more than just producing very great concrete, super steel, but they have to help us creating a sustainable future much more. Of course, that needs new business and support. And so maybe a question into the round. Do you see companies, but also the state and the citizen and the agency already prepared to do this next step?
Since you mentioned steel, I think we have to be acutely aware of how these things work. And the main difference between Sweden and Germany actually is not the technology of steelmaking. There are some differences because there are different ores they work from than us and whatever else. But that's for a very different conference, for a very different audience. The interesting thing is, if you look at the discussion, Sweden has the advantage of having one major steel company. As a consequence, a lot of the discussions we are having in Germany, or the cement industry is having, because that's normally organized in many more companies, is really about how do I get that interaction between society and the private sector without too many distortions. And this is an important thing, because at the end of the day, we believe in 50 years, there will be a market. You will not be allowed to sell any products anymore that are not green, whatever else. However, in the way running up to that, it will have to come from public funding for two reasons. First of all, the capital demand is just too high that a company could afford that from their own earnings, unless it has a really monopolistic situation. And secondly, maybe even more importantly, we have a long transition phase, because some companies have built the most modern plant yesterday to be run for another 30 years. do you now punish them because they didn't wait another 5 years operating an old plant in order to then have yet a better plant? So we have to really organize a transition phase, and that makes it extremely complicated, and therefore these models, how you do state funding in a way that actually helps us and doesn't just freeze and run into subsidy issues, is extremely difficult. And the more players you have in any given market and any given jurisdiction, the more complicated it becomes. And that's something which, particularly at IN4climate, I think in North Rhine-Westphalia we are seeing, because being such a highly industrialized region, we also see a high degree of different players and an enormous complexity in order to find instruments that really work. This is much easier in certain circumstances where you just have two partners talking to each other. It's normally a bit easier to come to. Therefore, we are very grateful actually for IN4climate to exactly bring that possibility to discuss both openly and in a trusted community. And yes, I do agree, trust is very important, because this is where we come to conclusions on what we're going to suggest to be possible solutions.
Okay, thanks a lot for these intensive statements. Do have the others also ideas on the issue? I mean, Sweden and France are also large countries with lots of industries.
Well, I could add some things from the Swedish situation. Of course, we have many steel industries, but of course it's not the same type of situation for all the steel companies in Sweden. But I would say that if we look around the steel industry as an example, we could see that there are different solutions for each industry and each site. What are the circumstances for the actual site by the industries? Could you use biomass, for instance, more electrification? Do you have natural gas as a starting point, for instance, in some processes? So I think we must look very carefully on each case, actually. So that is one thing I would like to add to this. Of course, we will see what will happen the coming years. I think when I talked about transparency earlier, I think what we need as an agency is more like transparency on goals and what are the possible steps. We don't need to know the exact details of technologies, for instance, but we need to somehow understand when could things happen, how much money is needed for different steps. That kind of information makes it much easier for us to act and inform the government on the need of budget, for instance. So that is one example.
Okay, thank you.
Stefan, and I would very much like to support what Clara just said. I think there's a big danger in the climate discussion. We are looking for the silver bullet, this one-fits-all solution. The only thing we are doing in the process is shooting ourselves in the foot, because there is no silver bullet, but we need a whole set of instruments in order to tackle it. And this is exactly what we need to look at, that we are not just improving one instrument till it's perfect, but not having addressed 99.9% of the other issues.
Maybe to add on that point, and I really reflected on, I like what Thomas said on that. If to quote him correctly, I hope I do it, policy haute couture. So really having a smart mix of initiative. Maybe we are beyond one-size-fits-all solutions when it comes to policy instruments in the end of the day to tackle this transition, because you have to consider several things. The situation that we are in currently, we have to address different types of competition in the end of the day. So you have the international competition under the keyword of carbon leakage. We have a price in Europe and somewhere else not. You have the competition between the conventional and the new technology in the end of the day, which is basically an OPEX competition or a transition competition that is based on that needs to be done as well. And then, of course, we have also the discussion on substitution going on, and you need elements to steer everything on that. And I fully agree with Clara that we need this mutual trust, or at least this mutual understanding between politics, academia, and economy or industry, on where we want to go, basically. The difficulty, for example, from an industrial perspective for me is, it's a basic chicken and egg problem in the end of the day. So I could be more open when I will invest in what, if I know what the framework conditions are in which we are operating in. And to be honest, decarbonization and the industry transition towards climate neutrality will make political framework conditions, but also societal framework conditions much more important for how we are operating in our business than they were in the past. This is quite clear, especially for this transition period.
Okay, thank you. So policy haute couture, I like the word, needs somehow tailor-made solutions. So are the agencies, are IN4climate, are these institutions that could help in tailoring policies to fit to those who need the policies without making it an exclusive luxury product that we are donating only the rich industries, which is the critique we always face with public. So Thomas, maybe you have an idea on that as the term came from you?
I mean, I spent my summer to try to make some haute couture for industry decarbonization in terms of policy with the recovery plan. I mean, we all know that the European aid frame is not that easy to manage. I think the publication of the European industrial strategy, so not the climate strategy, but the industrial strategy that has been published last March, provide us a good insight in terms of, yes, we want to protect more industry faced to Chinese or Asia. And in that sense, I think it's quite new. And Europe is, I feel, wants to play a role in terms of protecting their actor. Based on this, we've got lots of barriers in terms of articulation of fundings, and as you said, one technology will not solve the problems, but one instrument will not solve the problem as well in terms of policy. And I think because the DNA of the heavy industry is a lot of capex and a lot of energy OPEX, we need to address both. If I go for capex, I mean, for the cement French industry, we estimated in France that in order to decrease by 50% the CO2 intensity of the clinker, you should go for from 4 to 5 billion euro capex. For the next decade, I would say. We estimated that it's equivalent to the capex from this sector during the last 30 years. So that means that the rhythm should be 3 times speed, so 3 times compressed. I would say what they did in 30 years, you should do it in the next 10 years. That means that it's not a big wall. It's a wall, but it's not an extremely big wall. Public funding should play a role, but it should be well articulated. I think on OPEX, the heavy industry has the chance, I would say, that the repercussion of the price is quite low if you go for the final product. And we know that, for example, for the building, if you double the price of the clinker or the cement, you would have an increase of less than 1% in terms of price of the building at the end of the day for an house about 100 square meters. And I think there are some areas where the market is ready to accept 1% increase of its house. I think some other products are much more complex. If you go for chemical and plastics, if you go for chemical for the agriculture with ammonia and so on, it's much more complex. But here again, you have to fine-tune policy in order to really go, in order to analyze capex and the OPEX side. at the end, I think I'm not totally agree with what Ancien John said about some circular economy concept and so on, and the fact that the role of the public sector should play, yes, should play a great role, but I think industry should take its responsibility for the fact that globally, in Europe, industry is old, and performance associated with, from an environmental point of view, is, at least in France, is less performant than China and India. And this is something to consider. And we need to move forward together. But I mean, you can't put the pressure only on public side.
And just to clarify that, this was not meant. What I meant is, on circular economy, we actually have a very good legacy, particularly in Europe, particularly because we are old, because we have been through times where actually we needed to recycle much more than we do today due to economic situations, unfortunately, all of them generating from wartime situations. Therefore, many of our plants all throughout Europe are much better equipped than greenfield plants, which are just built on a steady supply of natural resources from out of the earth. Saying that, it's not that we can lay back and say, sorry, we have done everything, now others have to do it. It's a constant struggle. But I think it's important to understand we are not starting from scratch. It's not a new field. It's not, circular economy is not coming in there as something we haven't done before. It's not digitalization. No, it's something we have always done. And sometimes the problem is not so much to do it, but to phrase it correctly and to see what we have done and try to see how we can learn from that. That was what I meant. And that certainly is what we need to do together. These like the three represented here, and others are certainly very important for just bringing people together. Because, and I would like to emphasize something Christoph saying is, when I started in this industry, we have been much more open. We spoke to each other across company boundaries. If we do that today, we have immediately a legal issue regarding competition law. And this is something we need to solve, because we are now running into a very extremely difficult situation of, from the competition side, to be asked to speak less and less, from the climate side to be asked to speak more and more. And so the question is basically, which jail cell do you want to get yourself into? And the answer is none. So how do we get out of that? And that, I believe, is one of the key important things of agencies like yourself, to help us out of the dilemma and to help all of us to move forward.
Maybe I would like to add one point. I fully agree with Sanxian. So really, you agencies could play a brilliant role, and you do that already as a facilitator in between. And I think that this is a quite crucial. But I wanted to make one point to what Thomas said on the OPEX cost, basically. I fully agree with you, and this is the good news that I'm also giving our end customers at the end of the day. Even if my cement production increases cost by 100%, it will be, let's say, a little bit more than 1%, let's say something between 1 and 3%, depending on the house for the end customer. But nevertheless, you have to keep in mind that we are living in a non-ideal world. We do not have a global level playing field with regards to CO2 prices, which means that especially when you have to look into the value chain of the products. And for us, the CO2 intensive component, you could make outside of Europe, and you would not have this 100% price increase and deliver it into here. So the margin of the European producers would be killed. This is point one. And when it comes to the price elasticity, I work myself in purchasing. So I know, and as our business is primarily B2B, you look even to the second digit after the dot or the comma in the number. And if the cement is 1 cent more expensive, the green one, than the other one, there will be a lot of purchasers that do not want to buy that. So we need to really discuss policies on the one hand that can tackle this OPEX cost, also in competition to the conventional production that will still happen in Europe for some time at least. And then also to create willingness to pay, I have to call it like that, basically in the end, for the greener, but unfortunately for the time being more expensive product. And maybe in this regard, what would be something for the agencies as well, what I wanted to say, because I saw this question earlier on in the chat when it comes to fuel switches. So first of all, I want to say we work on that already. This is the alternative fuel strategy, but to make it quite easy, because lignite, coal and petcoke were mentioned, it's also a pricing policy, to be honest. To give a quite blunt answer, make gas extremely cheap, also with the consideration of the CO2 content behind. If it's cheaper to burn gas than coal and lignite, we will do it immediately. This I can say, but this is also a policy question in one sense. It's not just the market that can deliver that for Europe. And then basically we need the incentives for the alternative energy sources. And then unfortunately, but as well as the steel industry, we have high temperature processes. I need a flame of 2000 degrees and heat up the material to 1450 degrees. This is not that easy to do that with electricity. We are looking into that as well. But then again, commodity prices, electricity is much too expensive to do that, at least at the current point in time.
Stefan, do you have sound? We're not hearing you. Okay, then it's up to me to wrap this up. I have, myself, I have 10 to 20 questions I have to do without now in this discussion. We could have gone a lot longer. There are still some questions in the Q&A that are unanswered, but I think that chat will be open, so it's up to us to maybe get in there and answer one or two questions. There was just one coming in that's screaming industry transition platform. So Rainer and I may answer that. Yeah, not to take any more of your time and to keep the session in time. Thanks very much to all participants. It's been great to have your presentations. It's been a great discussion. Thanks for taking part. I hope the eceee community out there liked this session. On behalf of Stefan, of IN4climate, thanks for your input. Thanks from IN4climate to everybody. I think we'll meet in the chat in the next days of eceee. You can get in touch not only with me, I think with most of our speakers afterwards. Yeah, that's so far from me. Thanks very much. It's been great.